We leave them everywhere and all the time. They are considered one of the most reliable and most often recovered type of forensic evidence. They are used in our mobile phones and smart locks in our houses, and they're essentially the basis of biometrics and pretty much equal to a personal ID card. Of course, I'm talking about our fingerprints, which is one of the oldest and most useful forensic evidence that help to solve a countless number of criminal cases. So, fingerprints is the topic of this lecture. In this lecture, we will look at a brief history of fingerprinting, the unique characteristics that permit fingerprints to be used for personal identification, learn the classification system of fingerprint patterns, understand the methods used to develop and visualize latent finger marks, and recognize the importance of fingerprints for the biometrical identification. So please check these learning objectives, which are pretty helpful to structure the content you learn and will also be useful to reflect on while summarizing this topic and preparing for your next quiz. The archaeological evidence suggests that the distinctive nature of fingerprints has been known for a long time. The fingerprints have been used by Babylonians at least 2,000 years ago to authenticate business transactions on clay tablets, and around the same time it was used in ancient China for the same purpose. However, the earliest fingerprints we find in the archaeological excavations all over the clay tablets in Mesopotamia and on the Egyptian pyramids are estimated to be over 6,000 years old. However, the modern use of the fingerprints to solve crime started some 150 years ago. So here are the main milestones in the modern history of fingerprints and their way towards becoming one of the indispensable forensic tools. Now, we can probably say that the modern history of fingerprints starts in 1686, when Marcello Malpighi, who was a professor of anatomy at the University of Bologna in Italy, notes the common characteristics of spirals, loops, and ridges in fingerprints using the newly invented microscope for his studies. In 1858, Sir William Herschel, who worked as a British civil servant in India in the 19th century, was one of the first people in the modern history who has realized the potential application of the fingerprints for the identification purpose. He actually requested the local population in India to sign the documents with their fingerprints. Herschel also made a variety of experiments and soon realized that a person's fingerprints do not change over time. In 1916, 1 year before he died, he published his work entitled The Origin of Fingerprinting. In 1870s, Henry Folds has developed his system of classification and individualization to identify criminals, but has been initially rejected by Scotland Yard in the UK. Now, one of the main reasons it has been rejected was another system of personal identification which was widely used back then and developed by Alphonse Bertillon in 1883, who called this system anthropometry. We'll get back to this system shortly, but meanwhile, let's talk about Mark Twain, the famous author who I'm sure you're familiar with. So he wrote his novel Pudd'nhead Wilson in 1884. Now, the story is about two boys who look similar and switched at infancy, while each grows into the other's social role, either the slave or the master of the house. In that book, Twain describes fingerprints as a unique characteristics of a person that does not change through their life, and this is essentially can be summarized as the three fundamental principles of fingerprinting. So a fingerprint is unique to a particular individual, and no two fingerprints possess exactly the same set of characteristics. Fingerprints do not change over the course of a person's lifetime, with the exception of scars, which make them actually even more unique. and fingerprint patterns can be classified, and those classifications then used to narrow the range of suspects.